Hello, all. Welcome to another episode of The Manly Catholic. I'm James, your host, and with me we have a very special guest. We have Dr. Alex Lassard. Alex, welcome to the Manly Catholic Podcast.
Thank you very much. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely, it is my pleasure. And so, Alex, obviously, you guys just put on a huge conference, Adeodotus. I asked you this before we went live to make sure I did not butcher it. But why don't you give our audience a brief background of you, for those of you who have not heard of you, and then dive into Adeodotus and the conference that just happened in late June, and kind of the meaning behind that as well.
Very good. I grew up in Minneapolis, went to the College of St. Thomas, which is now the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul, Minnesota, and had the good fortune of meeting Don Briel within the first year of being there. It was his first year, my freshman year, and I followed his courses on Cardinal Newman, on general theology, and on the church. And this changed the path of my life towards theology first and Catholic education second. Outside the class, he introduced me to the great tradition of Catholic literature across the centuries, especially the British and American revivals of the last 70, 80 years. The great authors like Waugh and O'Connor and Sigrid Undset and Mauriac and Lampedusa, and basically he recapitulated what he had gotten from the great Professor O'Malley at Frank O'Malley at Notre Dame. I went on to graduate school at Boston College in systematic theology and studied with Father Matt Lamb, who was a wonderful Trappist out of the Gethsemane Abbey. He later founded the graduate programs in theology at Ave Maria and taught another generation of students who are now excellent tutors and professors. And the influence of Don and Matt and other great teachers that I had is really the reason for this nonprofit, Adeodotus. In a span of less than 40 days at the beginning of 2018, Don, Father Matt, and another friend who had helped us financially to start an independent Catholic school here in Pasadena all died. And this was a tremendous blow personally, but also a massive contribution and legacy. It struck me that I had to do something to remember that legacy and to find a way, if I was called to carry on their work in some smaller way. Don had founded the Catholic Studies movement, which is going very strong, and now is I believe it's the 30th year this year. So in 2018, I began to think about this and prayed, reflected, tried to discern a path, began speaking and writing more. And by 2021, we incorporated this religious nonprofit for the ongoing support of supporting the ongoing renewal of Catholic education. Our first major event was this past month in Pasadena at our beautiful St. Andrew's Church in Old Town Pasadena, as well as the Westin in just a couple blocks away. And the range of speakers, the path of the conference, which was highlighting the major figures of the tradition and its renewal, the wonderful people who came, and the wonderful liturgies that we had at St. Andrews, all contributed to make it an extraordinarily memorable period of time. And I believe it will set it's a kind of watershed for gathering the best that has been thought and written and said about Catholic education in its renewal. And I hope we can work with every other great organization. We already have partnerships with the Cardinal Newman Society, with ICLE, the Institute for Catholic Circe, who mostly serve an Orthodox and Protestant Christian school market, but are very friendly to Catholics as well. And so we hope this is a moment where we can be that bond of connection that Newman spoke of among people and organizations to accelerate the 50 plus years of renewal further into the what is a still much reduced Catholic parochial school system.
Now, Alex, forgive me if this is too much of a personal question, but you mentioned 2018 there were 3 or 4 individuals that passed away within about 40 days. Do you feel like that kind of spurred you, or maybe gave you a kick in a direction, either to I know the seeds were obviously planted already, but do you feel like that was just like an extra motivator? And if nothing else, like in their honor, I want to absolutely pursue this to the full extent of
Yes,
what
yes,
what all of your guys' dream were.
yes, absolutely, no question. It was a shock and a catalyst. And since then, it's only been reinforced by the loss of additional friends. Father Paul Mankowski, who was just one of the greatest priests I've ever known. Jack Newmeyer, one of the founders of Thomas Aquinas College. Father James Saul, who I didn't know personally, but who was a friend to even students of my colleagues of my kids who went to Santa Clara knew him well, even up to his last days. So there are connections to all of these great Catholic leaders in education, and there are a lot of them that are no longer here. So yes, it was both personal and I hope a broader, we just have to do this work, no matter what, and that generation is passing.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, very tragic, and I'm sure a very tough time of grieving for you as well. But obviously, it has borne much fruit, which includes this conference that was put on late June of last month, and kind of Adeodotus. Okay, so maybe let's dive into the name, the
Mm-hmm.
meaning behind the name, which is fascinating
Yeah,
to me because I've heard a couple of your other interviews when you delve into that. So I'd love to tell our
yeah,
listeners that, and then kind of
yeah.
recap the conference
Mm-hmm.
as well, because I know we're talking off
Sure.
air. What a great success it was.
Yes, thank you. Well, Adeodatus was the son born out of wedlock to St. Augustine. He was conceived when Augustine was about 17 years old. He was born to a woman that Augustine loved deeply, but was not his wife. And due to the influence of Saint Monica, that mother went into a convent, and Augustine uh, continued on the path towards bishopric and elevation in the church, and his theological and philosophical work, and his literary work in the Confessions. And Deodatus was with him throughout the process, throughout the next decade or more was still a decade of searching, and it was only about he was in his teens when Augustine finally had that final moment of conversion, which had been building from the intellectual conversion spurred by Cicero's Hortensius, and a moral conversion which had a kind of a catharsis a little earlier. But he finally had the religious and moral and intellectual all come together under that tree in the garden. So Adeodatus was a bit like the mirror image of so they were the same in the level of intellectual achievement, though Augustine says something about Adeodotus even kind of scaring him as how smart he was. I don't think that's the right. It's not the best translation, but he was brilliant, like Augustine, but he was chaste and holy throughout his life. And so, in a sense, this is the Augustine that he would have wanted to be had he not uh, gone down the paths that he did. But yet, at the same time, two things: you've got Augustine learning from all those things, and then secondly, God bringing good out of evil. And so Adeodatus is baptized with Augustine, and he's there when Saint Monica dies. He's not part of the Ostia uh, hierophany, at least as far as Augustine relates it in the Confessions. But he too dies within another year or so. So he's about 16 when he dies. So there's Augustine was 17 when he became a father, and Adeodatus is with him for 16 years and dies. And it's just one more of the many losses that shape Augustine's love.
What a great story. So why, I guess, was that the inspiration for the name behind the conference?
Uh,
Because obviously it's
well,
an amazing story, and I
yeah,
love that. But I'm just curious
yeah.
why you adopted that
Well,
one in particular.
it is personal too. My best friend in grad school is Mike Foley, who you probably know from the Drinking with the Saints.
Oh yes.
What do we call it? An enterprise. He's a mogul. I don't know. He dominates the drinking the cocktail market for Catholics. So we are both adopted children. And so we were both, like Adeodatus, conceived out of wedlock. And so he has always been uh, something of an inspiration to us. So I personally locked up the domain like 20 years ago, and I didn't use it for a very long time. But I've had Adeodatus as a placeholder, if you will, until we finally created a nonprofit to carry the name.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, that's amazing. It's
Yeah.
there's always a great story behind the naming of things, and this is no exception for sure. So thank you for sharing that.
Hey,
So
sure.
so let's
Yeah.
let's talk about the conference a little bit before we dive into kind of Catholic education in general, because I know
Yeah.
again we were talking off the air, and it was. I mean, it's from what I could hear and see, a resounding success. I know you mentioned it went about as perfectly as you could have imagined. So just give our audience a little bit of a background of what went on during those few days.
Sure. And I really do feel that this was providentially guided from start to finish. I had some ideas, but I had some friends, and I wanted to bring them together. And over time, it took shape. It took over a year to plan, to get everything in place, to raise some money, et cetera. But what I wanted to do first off, and we can talk about the bigger plan over a three conference cycle later. But to start off with, I wanted to get back um, to give an understanding of the tradition in a more or less um, uh, in an ordered way that would be practical for the teacher in the classroom. So, in other words, what's the importance of Jesus, the teacher, in the classroom and in the office, so to speak. So the leaders of the school, the teachers, and then for the students. And so we started with Jesus the teacher, who is at the heart, the beginning and the end of all Catholic education, of all education generally, but we acknowledge it. And that was a talk and to a Roman, Homer and Virgil, to talk about epic literature and its importance to epic in general, but Homer and Virgil still to in the particular to education, and that was a talk given by Andrew Kern, the head of CIRCE, the organization I mentioned a little while ago. Then James Matthew Wilson, the great poet, was our Plato speaker. Ed Fazer spoke on Aristotle, excellent as always. Jared Stout, who was both a student of Don Briel's later in the Catholic Studies era, and also of Father Matt Lamb at Ave Maria, and a board member of Adeodotus. And I will also say my co-editor on the volume of essays that will come out of this conference. Jared spoke on education in the Bible as a follow-up to Jesus the Teacher. And we then went on to St. Augustine with Mike Foley, St. Benedict, Francis, Dominic, Father Spitzer spoke on St. Ignatius and the Ratio Studiorum, Arthur Hippler on the Church's teaching on Catholic education, on education as such. We covered then we got into the I would mark the renewal basically from Newman forward. And so Paul Shrimpton came from Oxford to speak on Newman. We had Joe Hessmeyer speak on De La Salle and John Bosco, and that's almost contemporary there. Father Sebastian Walsh, our chaplain, the great Norbertine, spoke on Charles de Koninck, who was the teacher of the teachers at St. Mary's Moraga, as well as Thomas Aquinas College that came after they were at St. Mary's Moraga. Margarita Mooney, Clayton spoke on Jacques Maritain and Luigi Giussani. Dale Alquist, well, you can guess who Dale Alquist talked on. I wouldn't ask him to stray from Chesterton, and he was wonderful as always. David Whalen from Hillsdale was our John Senior speaker, and that was excellent. R.J. Snell of the Witherspoon Institute spoke on Lonergan, who is lesser known but very important, and that was part of what I hope to bring forward. We'll make more of that along the way. Andrew Seeley did a terrific job on Christopher Dawson, also a critical figure in the renewal of Catholic education. And then Neil Hudson on Mortimer Adler and Jacques Barzun, who were friends of his. Mike Naughton came from Catholic Studies at St. Thomas to speak on Don Briel and the Catholic Studies movement, and that was beautiful and moving. And then the conference ended in this series with Father Edmund Waldstein speaking on the Berquist brothers, as well as Jack Newmeyer and Ron MacArthur. And so we tried. There are many more figures that will be part of our conference handbook on Catholic education and culture, but those were our live major figures of the tradition and its renewal.
Alex, do folks have access to these talks? I know you mentioned the handbook obviously is going to be coming out. Can people still go to the website and get access to these talks, or is it going to be transitioned to that handbook that you mentioned?
It will be both, and we are in the process of our media team is about a quarter to a third of the way through the post-production. They're professionally produced. We captured all talks, all sermons, and the full Mass of the Americas, which is our concluding liturgy, with a brief and beautiful talk by the composer Frank LaRocca ahead of time, and that was just a stunning way to finish the conference. But we also have additional materials such as a conversation between Andrew Seeley and Andrew Kern on epic literature that carries forward what Andrew spoke of what Andrew Kern spoke of in his Homer and Virgil. And Andrew Seeley is our most articulate representative for Tolkien as the modern epic writer. And so there are some very interesting things there, and we'll add more and more resources. And we will do two other things. So first off, that library will be accessible in the same way you could have streamed it. For the very same price, though there'll be many more resources. Everyone will get access to that who attended or who purchases access to the conference library. And we will make that very rich and deep. We will also have a free library of resources on basically a library of Catholic education texts that are in the public domain that we will be putting together. So there'll always be something of interest that you might not be able to find anywhere else that we'll put together on a free basis. But we will take these talks and these sermons, and we will be creating courses out of them that have been requested by a number of dioceses already. So the Archdiocese, we had 9 dioceses involved. This was not an area where I recruited that or solicited that. It was most gratifying that the Archdiocese of Los Angeles contacted me and made us a catechetical program immediately. That the Archdiocese of Boston reached out to have us create a learning path for their 100 schools, and we had the superintendent of the Archdiocese of Denver, Elias Mo, here, as well as representatives from a couple Denver high schools and many other schools from around the country. But I just wanted to emphasize that this was a most welcome and most gratifying and unanticipated immediate response from dioceses who are looking to for these kinds of resources as fundamentals for their Catholic schools. So we'll create learning paths that are specific to the needs of a particular diocese, and we will also I'm sorry, are you still there?
I am. Yes, you're
Okay.
fine. Is it cutting
I'm
out
sorry.
on your end?
I'm very sorry. I had a phone call that interrupted the video.
Yeah, you're fine.
And so I'm not
problem.
actually seeing. But so anyway, I'll just wrap up on that. That we have the basic resources. We will create a number of paths, courses that help individual schools and dioceses move through the fundamentals of the tradition in a very practical way. And then we will have these not only the handbooks with we have a brand new contract with Catholic University Press of America, and we will be publishing both Jared Stoud's our first book under the Adeodotus and Catholic View imprint will be a book on the sacramental dimensions of Catholic education. And then our second book will be the first handbook, the first volume of the handbook on Catholic education and culture.
So just a few projects that you guys are undertaking right now.
Yeah.
No.
Well, there's a lot to do, and there are so many great people working on these things. That was the most part of the joy of doing this was to meet so many other people. I mean, I knew Andrew and Mike Van Hecke and Beth Sullivan and Andrew Kern and others who are working so fruitfully in this area, this vineyard of the Lord. But there are so many others that I met, people from the John Paul, the Great Institute in Lafayette, Louisiana, people who came from Long Island, Dom Elias Carr, who runs the schools of St. Mary's, and from Seattle to Long Island, from Canada to Costa Rica. We had a Colombian and a Costa Rican contingent who are renewing Catholic education in Central and Latin America. Really exciting things happening throughout really throughout the world, and we're very happy to be a little gathering, a little source of connection and a resource for people.
Well, you guys might be a little gathering, but you clearly are making huge waves, especially in the Catholic education world. And you touched on a few things I wanted
Hmm.
to kind of dive a little bit deeper on. So, you mentioned revitalizing Catholic education or renewing it. And you mentioned the epic literature, and I always find that
Hmm.
so fascinating that when you talk about, renewing education, that time and time again, you always go back to the classics. So there's something about this epic literature. You mentioned Homer, you mentioned Virgil, you mentioned Plato, Aristotle, Chesterton, you mentioned Tolkien. So why is it, Alex? Do we keep coming back to these timeless classics? I mean, clearly there's something about how these individuals wrote that impacts humans, no matter what age in life that they are, and no matter how technologically advanced we become, no matter how more sophisticated we become, we always come back to these classics. So
Hmm.
why is it, Alex, that in your perspective is when we talk about this revitalization, it usually comes back to kind of the basics really of education and the foundations of education.
Well, I'll take a couple stabs at it. One is simply that if we look at Jesus the teacher, Jesus doesn't teach anything that the Father didn't tell him to teach. So he is a representative of the Father, and our teachers are representatives of him, and his story is the story that we all, every great story, every great epic um, is in some way uh, tied into the one great epic of the Bible. The Lord of the Rings, you could not imagine that being written without a deep knowledge of the biblical story, of the whole arc of biblical history from Genesis to Apocalypse. And our stories just fit into that story. There's when we see when we read of our origins and our ends, there's a space between the Acts of the Apostles and the Book of Revelation, which is the space in which our stories are written into that in a living way. Uh, so there's that, and as made in the image and likeness of God, but as fallen, this great drama of a of a good garden and a perfect creation falling. Act one, Act two, and Act three is redemption and sanctification, and everything that plays out from there forward. That's the great drama, and every other story is in. Jordan Peterson has gotten onto this, except for getting to the point. I think he's kind of like where C.S. Lewis was, where C.S. Lewis was before Tolkien made him realize or brought him to the point where he could realize that it's the myth that's true. And so every true story, as ambitious or as big or as small as it is, if it's true, it is in some way a mirror or a part of or a retelling or reformulation of some aspect of that great story of the creation of the world, the creation of man, the fall of man, and the redemption of man.
Mm. Yeah, it really is. It really is fascinating to me though too. And I know we talked about off the air too, is that, sadly, and this is where you guys are stepping into the kind of the trenches, as sadly there are a lot of Catholic schools that, as we say, they're kind of Catholic in name only, so to speak. And obviously there's amazing Catholic institutions out there. And so it sounds like you guys are reinvigorating that curriculum, where not only are you going back to the basics, but you're also going back to the basics of our Catholic faith. Because that's like you mentioned with Jesus. He never taught anything that the Father didn't tell him. And same thing that he taught the apostles, who then led the church, and now we have this amazing catechism. So I guess kind of dive into that a little bit more too. Of
Hmm.
obviously the vigorous curriculum with the epic literature and things that you're talking about, but also the foundations of our Catholic faith as well.
Yeah, and let me just do a brief follow-up on your last question.
Sure.
How did Jesus teach? Jesus taught in parables. Jesus taught he taught to the imagination in a way that literature, epic, and good history, and even when we get far enough along, every good work, every good conversation is a logoi of our logoi of the logos. And I mean to say that the beauty of literature that draws us in, we see increasingly in subjects that we might not initially. When we follow a path of education towards our flourishing and towards the fulfillment of the circle of knowledge that Newman spoke of, we will come to see that in everything. So we'll come to see the beauty of mathematics and of physics and of psychology deeply and truly understood, as well as every other aspect of creation that we can turn our attention to. So there is another aspect of the importance of story and of not just epic but any narrative. But then, in terms of Catholic schools, yes, we hit a high point in about 1965 with over 13,000 Catholic schools. Out of the Third Plenary Council in the late 1800s, the church had mandated a school in every parish and every Catholic child in one of those schools. It never happened, but it got really it happened to a great degree, and that was the peak. Over 5 million students in that period per year. We're now just over 2 million, and the population is much bigger. So that's a much bigger drop than 5 to 2. And then secondly, fewer than half of those schools are still open, and that will keep going down. And in LA, it's happening, 2 to 3 schools a year, 4 sometimes are closing, big schools. So yes, the schools were not in good shape. It wasn't a function of the 60s only. It was a function of the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, where the instruction obviously wasn't robust enough or adequate enough to have students and faculty and the orders of nuns and the priests and the bishops be able to handle the challenges that came in the 60s and 70s and beyond. And so, in a sense, the whole thing had been, for various reasons, the whole thing was already kind of hollowed out, and it was not hard to decimate it at first, and then it kept going. So it's really like 80% down from those years, and we're just turning the corner. But what's important about the last 50 years is that all along the way, there have been people who have been trying to think it through, retrieve all the good that maybe had been lost or forgotten or made into rote instead of understood and strongly held and possessed, if you will, in terms of self-appropriation, where you make something your own and you can't be taken away from you. People have been working towards that in various formats, in various platforms, in colleges, independent schools, homeschool, charter schools, hybrids, and that is now the ballast or the critical mass, I would say, at this point, to have a rapid acceleration of the renewal. And of course, there have been cultural things that have poured fuel on this. Parents have been shown things that they may not have known during the lockdowns. They saw classrooms that they didn't fully understand before. They saw ideology has become it's accelerating in a hypertrophic way. And so parents are awakening. The school choice movement is strengthening. The Supreme Court has really helped with the Macon versus Maine case settled last year. So this is a moment where we can retrieve, reformulate, and renew all the good and make it our own again in a way that can be robust, and centered in charity and the love of the Word, who loved us into creation, and passed along to the next generation.
Yeah, I mean, one of the blessings, Alex, that you mentioned, and I think we'd speak to the church as a whole, is that obviously there's a lot of negativity, a lot of scandal that's come out in the last several years, but at the same time, it brings to light the things that needed to come out, because you can't change, you can't reinvigorate, you can't renew something that if you think if it's going fine. So it is, I mean, obviously a tragedy with, like you said, during COVID, parents are like, what are they teaching you? And without the pandemic, then that a lot of this probably may not have happened, or at least taken several more years for it to kind of come to light. So what you guys are doing, like I said, you guys are kind of just stepping in and saying, hey, that we've identified a problem, and let's figure out a way to do that. And I did want to kind of get your perspective too, Alex, on the changes in technology. Obviously with education has, my gosh, just completely changed. Even from when I was in grade school and high school, it just has skyrocketed. So how have you noticed, maybe as you dive deep, because you kind of get into the the back burner and the blueprints of education, how have you noticed, talking with, I'm sure, a bunch of teachers and in academia as well, how have you seen and heard that technology has changed the way education needs to be taught and presented to young students?
Well, I think the awareness is already strong and growing that the temptations of technology as as bringing efficiency or um, or a new form of learning to students. I think that's been exploded. I think it's been increasingly clear that it not only isn't a good in the classroom, but that it also has significant harms. Uh, Now, schools such as Wyoming Catholic have gone the farthest in removing technology from higher education, and that is a very positive thing for the students who go through it. Uh, Most even things like law schools don't let many law schools don't let you take notes electronically anymore because it's not a component of learning in the same way that writing is. Um, but so you have a couple different aspects. One is that I should say the positive thing. Uh, if you already have a good habits, you're fairly well formed. You're not a slave to technology, but you control your technology. Then there are great blessings. So we have been able to do few friends do a communio call every month, and where we did for a long time. And we were able to bring people together that it would never have happened if it was only live meetings. So it can extend the reach in a positive way, just as families can see their loved ones on a more frequent basis. But that none of that substitutes for then meeting. I'll give you a great example. I had DC Sindler onto one of those calls last year, and it was a great call. He's a wonderful thinker, wonderful guy, and I had invited him to my conference, but he couldn't travel at that point. But we happened to be in Denver together last month, and or not last week, and that 4 days, spending a significant amount of time over a number of days. There's nothing like that. There's nothing like that to the presence of an emerging friendship, It's an extraordinary thing, and so even the positive things are only shadows of the real thing. But then on the other, on the much more sinister side, the race to the bottom of the brain stem, the substitute of dopamine hits for real achievement. So in other words, the the rewards given for no real achievement, which is essentially what all social media is and all gaming is. That is just a horrific thing for young people who think they can get the reward because they're told they can without actually learning something, doing something, or becoming something better. That's just that's a horrible thing, and that combined with envy uh, and and the nastiness, the mimetic contagion of social media, which is peer pressure on steroids. All of those things are utterly damaging and contribute directly to depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation, which is a crime beyond. That's a crime that will cry out to heaven for vengeance.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, Alex, even just what you're talking about, what did you call it, the race for the brainstem with
The race to the
dopamine
bottom of the brainstem.
to the
Yeah,
bottom of the
the
brainstem. Yeah,
brainstem.
so
Yeah,
because I mean, when I was growing up, I mean, I was basically addicted to video games, and I remember even just hearing you talk. I remember I would, you have the gaming achievements, right? You reach the next level or you win the championship, and you're like, oh yeah, like that would be so cool. And then you get to it and you're like, oh, that's kind of stupid. Like now I want more, and like you don't even like celebrate. It's not even like an exciting thing, but you think it's gonna
yeah,
be, and then it's like more, more,
yeah,
more, more, and then it just keeps feeding you. And same thing with the social media. And obviously, like you said, like we
yeah,
wouldn't be able to do this interview without
yeah,
technology. So there is great positives, like you said, having those habits, having those
yeah,
parameters set in place. Technology can be a fantastic thing for the majority of us, but yeah, I mean, social media, especially, just it's designed to make you addicted. That's what they're to keep scrolling, swipe up,
yeah,
the
yeah,
reels and YouTube shorts and everything that's coming out now.
yeah,
It's such a gosh, it's such like I said, it can be a positive thing, but also an extremely negative thing as well if not used
yeah. And
properly.
just
So,
one more point about that is that even if you're on the right path, you're growing in intellectual virtue. You're understanding more about the human condition, and you want to defend the truth that you've discovered. Um, if you go online to do that, you're becoming part of a game that you're a pawn in, not a controller of. So the technology and the monetization of attention, uh, there is no care for what you actually think. You can be on either side, and you're part of the monetization because you keep the fight going. You're actually part of the problem in fighting in that way, which is not something a lot of people want to hear. But you have to find a way to transcend the medium itself, because the medium is a demonic medium. It's a medium that is meant to scatter people, and fights on the internet are part of that, and the ability to create scapegoating moments on the internet, especially Twitter. I mean, that is straight out of Leviticus. It's just it's the old scapegoat mechanism being worked digitally and on at scale, and it is literally demonic, the scattering of the demon. So
well,
anyway, that's
I mean, we can have you back on just talking about that, but I'm just
yeah,
thinking about it too, Alex. It's the things that people say to each other on social media that you would not say to somebody's face. I mean, it
yeah,
just like even just having a conversation with you, like I don't we're not in person, but there's things that I might say to you on Twitter I would not say to you right now, just even
yeah,
via a Zoom
Yeah, and
interview. So
yeah,
it divides people, like you said, and
yeah,
it makes them have a courage behind a keyboard, so to speak.
yeah, yeah.
But
Anonymity and unaccountability are two near occasions of sin. And malice. I mean, this is covetousness, envy, and malice and pride are the core. There was somebody who did a nice uh, social media companies as connecting each one to a one of the seven deadly sins a while back. It was very funny. It had a lot of it rang pretty true as you went down the line. But anyway, that's probably enough on that.
I'll have to look that up.
Yeah, look
That
that
sounds
up.
like a very fascinating. It's
Yeah,
connected to the seven deadly sins. Perfect.
yeah, yeah.
Uh, all right, Alex. Well, I know you have to get going to an anniversary dinner in the next 20 minutes or so. So I want you to be able to get ready. But I do want to
Thanks.
ask you,
Yeah,
how can folks find out more about you and Adeodotus? And then I'll have one more question for you, and then we'll
great.
wrap it up.
Great. Thank you. So everything we're doing right now is on our main web page, adeodotus.com, and you can look up Augustine's son if you don't know how to spell that, or maybe you can put up the spelling on the page or something. But it's ADEO. It's gift of God or given by God. That's the meaning of Adeodatus. And Augustine did see this son as given by God. So ADEODATUS.com. And we will be we're planning out the next conference, which is going to it's going to focus on the theme of integration across curricula, pedagogy, culture, and principles and axioms. So it's going to be a day on each of those things, and it will have it will be a very practical understanding of the sacramentality of Catholic education, of the integration of knowledge in what Newman called the circle, what C.S. Lewis referred to as the tower of knowledge, and others have had. There are some very, very interesting images for this. But and then the path. There'll be a day on the curriculum or path or the race really that you run, like Paul ran the race. That's what a curriculum is. It's not a reified assessment tool. It's a path of learning, and then school culture and the big questions of how you learn in friendship and love and charity. So we're working through all of that, and we'll announce those things on the website. We do have a major Eucharistic project with the Cardinal Newman Society that will be part of this next conference. We're not quite sure where it'll be yet or when it will be. I suspect it will be in 2025, not 2024, because of the amount of planning that it takes to make this a really great a gathering of people. So I'll just put that out there that I think you'll have time, but we also need to do a lot of work with what we already gathered, which is some of the best material on education. I mean, I put this together to keep learning, and I learned a lot. So we're going to bring that to everyone else.
Well, Grand Rapids, Michigan would love to have the conference here in 2025, Alex. I'm just going to throw our name in the hat there.
That's very interesting because Father Sirico and I have been talking. He's got a new project called on the Newman the Newman Institute for Catholic Education and Liturgy and Reverent Liturgy, and he sent a couple representatives were at the conference from his group, and of course James Matthew Wilson lives in Grand Rapids, and there's some good connections. That would be very interesting. there are a few other possibilities, but I do like the idea of doing something in the heart of the country, the Midwest, somewhere, and then on the East Coast, and bring it to the whole country over time, physically,
Wonderful.
and be able to bring more people who may not want to travel to California or whatever.
Sure. Well, wonderful. Well, hey, I just
Yeah.
said that as a joke. I'm like, oh, all right, he might be serious here. All right, I would love that. I'd love to go attend this conference. But
Yeah.
so I forgot to ask you this in the
Hmm.
beginning. So we'll wrap up with the question: is
Hmm.
if you could be the patron saint of anything, Alex, what would it be and why?
Yeah, I have never thought of that. I do want to be a saint, and I'm working on that. That was one of the things my great mentor Don Briel, if he was ever asked, um, and this was true of Rene Girard as well. Personal sanctity is what this is about. There's to become a saint is the only really worthy goal of any of this. So I would say there's already a patron saint of what I would like to be, and that's John Henry Newman, and that's being a bond of connection among people, a link in a chain. So that beautiful prayer that he wrote on having a mission that may not be known in this life, but will be shown to him by God, to be that link, to be that bond, to bring people together in love and share in love of the good and the true and the beautiful. That's what I want to be the patron saint of.
I
But
love
again,
that. Yeah, that's
Newman did that, and no one. I don't think. Yeah, I can't do that in any shadow of Newman, and I doubt anybody. I doubt there's a better saint for that.
well, as a lot of my guests say, is like if I just become a saint, that's all I really care about. I don't need to be a
Sure.
patron saint of anything. I'll just take the sanctity at that point.
Yep.
Well, Alex,
Yep.
this has been a blast. Thank you so much for coming on, and enjoy your anniversary dinner. Did you say 32 years?
32 years tomorrow.
Well, congratulations. What an accomplishment. So
My lovely wife Angela, 9 children, and number 6 and 7 grandchildren on the way.
fantastic. Congratulations. Well,
Thank you.
thank you again, Alex. Thank you so much for everyone who was listening. Until next time, go out there and be a saint.